Bobby and Suzanne began to slap Tyler and Marvin around. They called them nasty names and would often leave them home alone. Hi there, my name is Seth, and I am having a hard time deciding whether or not I did something bad. Maybe after you hear my story, you can let me know what you think. So let me start off by saying that my parents were amazing. They were patient and very attentive, but they didn't buy me everything that I ever wanted. It wasn't like they denied me anything. If I wanted a toy, they always gave me goals for me to achieve, in order to earn it. I was fairly young, so it wasn't like I could do a lot, really. But if I wanted a new video game, my father would want me to help him rake leaves in the yard or to cut the grass twice a week for 2 months. And so long as I did my chores without complaining, they would buy whatever it was that I was working towards. I honestly never thought that things would ever change, but while traveling for work on their private plane, my parents were caught in a terrible storm that caused their plane to crash, and both of them died that day. I was only 8 at the time, and I really didn't know how to process the pain that I was feeling. I did have extended family, but none of them could be found, and so I was placed up for adoption. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait long as a family came to my rescue and adopted me only a week later. They were a young couple named Bobby and Suzanne, and they had newborn twins named Tyler and Marvin, but loved the idea of having an older child as well. I don't know if the agency did a thorough background check on them, and I highly suspect that they didn't. But they seemed decent enough, and the agency needed to make room at the orphanage, which was overcrowded. Bobby and Suzanne, though, would prove to be among the worst people I had ever met. As soon as they brought me home, they showed me to my room, which was only big enough for a single bed and an end table that they told me was for my clothes. Seeing that made me very worried. It wasn't like I had expected them to live in a mansion like I used to, but I at least expected a room that was slightly bigger than a closet. I said as much to Bobby, and he slapped me hard across the face. "What's the matter? Do you think that you're too good for us? This is your new room, and if you don't like it, then I suggest you begin to pretend like you do, or there is plenty more where that came from." Bobby raised his fist as if he was going to slap me again, and I flinched and fell to the floor. Suzanne, meanwhile, was just laughing at me.
"The poor little boy, such a scaredy cat."
"You'll stay in this room unless we tell you that you can leave it. Do you understand?" I nodded, out of fear. They wouldn't let me out of that room to do anything other than chores, school, and to eat. Although the meals that they provided for me were barely edible. They would often feed me bread, water, and if I was lucky, applesauce. Meanwhile, the twins were beginning to grow up, and while I had to follow millions of rules, they were allowed to roam free and do whatever they wanted to. Bobby and Suzanne would often say that as their adopted child that I was no better than just a servant that they allowed to have their last name. They didn't care about me at all and would always tell me that I was worthless and that I wouldn't amount to anything in life. As I got older, they even began forcing me to babysit the twins when they would go out, and they went out very often. Both Tyler and Marvin began to see me as the third parent and would often actually prefer me to their actual parents. Even though I wasn't old enough to watch them, I did my best to keep them safe, and the three of us really began to bond as brothers. My relationship with them was the one ray of sunshine in my otherwise bleak life. Between school and all the chores that my adopted parents forced on me, playing with my brothers was the one source of joy I had, but that all changed when I turned 15. I remember sitting in my room all by myself, crying since it was my birthday, and no one cared. At least I thought so until my brothers slid a drawing under my door. It was a picture that they drew of the three of us playing, and it had the words, "Happy Birthday, Big Brother," poorly written on it. It made me feel so happy, but then I heard Bobby and Suzanne talking in the kitchen, and what they were saying worried me. "We need to kick him out now. The money that we are getting from the government is barely covering the cost of feeding him. Plus, sooner or later, he'll get bigger than us, and then we won't be able to bully him to do things anymore. We'll just figure something out, but he has to go." As soon as they finished arguing, they stormed down the hall to my room and dragged me out of the house and threw me into their car. They then drove me to the other side of the city and told me to get out. But where am I? What am I supposed to do here? "We don't know, and we don't care. Just get out." Before I could say anything else, they drove off. I couldn't believe it. They had abandoned me and left me with nothing more than the clothes on my back. I'm sure it was by sheer accident, But they had abandoned me in front of a homeless shelter, and without knowing where else to go, I wandered into the building. The man that was running the shelter noticed me as soon as I walked in and rushed over to me to find out what was wrong. He could tell by the look on my face that I was in distress. "Hi there, little guy. Are you lost?" More like thrown away. Then told him what had just happened to me and how my adopted parents had been treating me for years, and he just nodded his head as he listened. As rough as my story was, it was one that he had heard many times before, and sadly wasn't surprised. Well, that is a tragedy for sure. I wish I could do more for you, but the best I can offer is a room upstairs in my apartment. I live above the shelter, and you're welcome to be my roommate, but only on the condition that you stay in school. I didn't know what else to say. The idea that all I had to do was go to school, and he would let me stay with him, felt like a very fair trade, and so I took him up on his offer. He was truly appreciative of how I would do chores around the house and the shelter without being asked, and praised me for doing so even. This confused me though, as I was just doing them more so as just an instinctual thing. I had been forced to do chores all my life, and so it just felt natural to keep doing them. But unlike Bobby and Suzanne, John gave me credit and thanked me often for all my help. As I grew older, John helped me to save up so that I could eventually go to college. But the day that he brought home a computer for me to use to study was the turning point for me. I found that I was an expert when it came to using that computer, and I loved to surf the internet. In fact, that was when I discovered that there were people that made content for the internet as their careers, and I wanted to be one of them. I started making videos of me playing games, and while it took a bit for people to notice me and start following my videos, I nevertheless started to build up a massive following of people, and that was when I started making money through advertisers. So much, in fact, that I was able to pay for my entire college tuition without having to borrow a single penny. I still volunteered in the shelter, though, as it made me happy to help those that were less fortunate than myself. Even after I graduated from college and got myself my own apartment, I still made sure to spend a large portion of my free time at the shelter, making sure that the people that came there were always well fed and treated with respect. A few years later, when I was 25, I was working at the shelter when I suddenly saw two young men that looked vaguely familiar. As they came up to me to ask for food, I instantly threw my arms around them and hugged them deeply. They were confused at first, but once I said their names, they embraced me as well. "Tyler? Marvin? Is that you?" After a lot of tears and a hearty meal, they began to tell me that after Bobby and Suzanne had kicked me out, things began to go downhill for them as well. Without me there to take out their frustrations on, Bobby and Suzanne began to slap Tyler and Marvin around. They called them nasty names and would often leave them home alone. When the twins were 15, they decided that they needed to leave just like I did, and so they struck out into the world. The problem was that they had nearly no money and they instantly became homeless. They had been begging for money ever since. As soon as I heard this, I hated my adopted parents even more. It was bad enough that they kicked me out, but for them to treat their own flesh and blood that way was beyond disgusting. I knew that I had to reclaim my role as their big brother, and I invited them to move in with me. Just like John had done for me, my only rule was that they had to go to school and to volunteer at the shelter. They readily agreed, but were worried that they would be too much of a burden on me. However, I assured them that the money that I made from being an influencer was only part of my income. The much bigger portion came from all the investments that I was making. You see, I went to college to refine my knowledge of the stock market and currencies, and that's where a lot of my money came from. After a few months, a reporter came to the shelter and asked if they could take some photos for a piece that they were working on, and I agreed. They took photos of me, Tyler, and Marvin, and wrote a story about how wealthy I was, and how wonderful it was that I had volunteered at the shelter for so many years. I didn't think anything of it, but then a few weeks later, Bobby and Suzanne showed up at the shelter and demanded to speak with me. "Hey you, well, looks like you made something out of yourself after all. That's just as well. Now you can pay us back for all the money that we wasted on you when you were younger."
Yeah, you should take care of us now.
What are you two idiots going on about? You two barely did anything for me other than behave like abusive and dangerous people. I'm amazed that the three of us are even alive today in spite of all that you did. You ungrateful brat, you owe us for taking you in when your stupid parents died. Ungrateful for what? You treated me like a slave and locked me in a small room and took advantage of me and forced me to do manual labor when I should have been a child enjoying life. Oh, that's it. I've had enough lip out of you. I'll show what talking back gets you. I saw him wind up and get ready to slap me, and even though I could have stepped back and dodged him, I wanted him to hit me. I wanted to show him that he didn't have power over me anymore, and so I stayed put and took the slap on my face and just kept staring at him. At least that was the idea. But once he slapped me, it triggered something in me, and I went into a rage, and I jumped onto Bobby, and I began to punch him until he lost consciousness. Suzanne couldn't do anything other than look on in horror as I punched Bobby over and over again. Eventually, police showed up, and Bobby demanded that I got to prison. But after hearing from the people in the shelter about what had happened, the police took my side. They decided that I had acted in self-defense and that they wouldn't press charges against me. I, however, did press charges against Bobby, and as it turned out, this wasn't his first run-in with the law. The officers that arrested him told me that Bobby had quite the rap sheet and was known to get drunk and start fights. When the case was brought before a judge, he took one look at Bobby, and between his many offenses and the fact that he had assaulted a volunteer at a homeless shelter, he sentenced him to prison for 5 years. This made me and the twins feel very victorious. While Bobby was gone, Suzanne really struggled for a bit, but ended up shoplifting to try to make ends meet and ended up getting herself arrested as well. With both of them in prison, they lost their house, and things are going to be very difficult once they are released. As for the twins, they recovered nicely from their time living on the streets, and they are currently in college. One is in school to become a lawyer, while the other is going to become a dentist. And I couldn't be more proud of them. They now see me as their one and only parent, as they have disowned Bobby and Suzanne, and have sworn to never speak to them ever again. As for me, I have more money than I will ever know what to do with, and I have begun donating large amounts to the shelter and other shelters around the city. So there you have it. So do you think I overreacted when I attacked Bobby, or do you think I was justified?
Hi, my name is Audrey. I live with my husband Sergio in our little house. I know it isn't one of those huge mansions that we see on TV sometimes, but I still think our home is pretty big. Big enough for the two of us and any guests that we want to come over, since we have a few guest bedrooms too. We were pretty happy living on our own, just the two of us. But after a little while, I got a message from Sergio's mother, Vivian.
Hi, Audrey. I hate to bother you, but would it be possible for me to live with you and my son for just a little while? I'm looking for a job, but I just can't keep my apartment anymore with the amount of rent I'm paying. So would you mind if I stayed with you until I can get a new place? It'll only be for a week or two.
I discussed it with my husband, and he was open to the idea. He loved his mom a lot, so it was easy for him to accept her proposal. As for me, I was on the fence about it. We had the space for her, sure, but I didn't know if I wanted her living with us for a couple of weeks. Whenever we went to visit her in her old apartment, there was always loads of unwashed dishes, clothes scattered around the floor, and boxes of stuff piled onto each other. I was worried that she might make a mess of our place too. But Sergio looked so excited, and I didn't want to take that away from him. She was a nice lady, so I allowed her to move in with us until she could find her own place.
This place is magnificent. I'm so glad that you let me stay here.
Make yourself at home. We're happy to have you here with us.
And she really did. She settled right into her new room, unpacked her things, and I was surprised to find that everything was neat and tidy. I was proud that she had managed to turn herself around like this. Maybe she wasn't going to turn our house into a giant dump like I first thought. Now I felt bad that I had judged her so quickly without even waiting to see first. So I welcomed her into our home with open arms. For the first week, everything went smoothly. Vivian barely bothered us at all, and even helped me with the dishes the first night she was here. Things were going well. Sergio went off to work one day, and I stayed at home to complete some of my own work. I was able to work online, so I figured it would be better if one of us could stay and watch the house. Plus, I was able to go to meetings and get all my work done in my pajamas in my own living room. But Sergio wasn't as lucky and still had to go to his job in person. But as I began to prepare for work, I noticed that Vivian had plopped down onto our couch, eating our ice cream, and had the TV turned up really loud. I decided to confront her about it since I had a meeting soon. Hey, I don't want to bug you or anything, but would you mind turning down the TV? I have a meeting in a couple minutes, and I'd appreciate it if you could keep it a little quieter.
What are you talking about? I live here now, so why can't I watch my shows how I want? Why would you harass your poor mother-in-law like this? Just wait until Sergio hears about this.
No, that's fine. I'm not harassing you. I guess you can keep the TV how you like it. I was stunned. I knew we told her to make herself at home, but this was too much. She was still our guest. She couldn't treat me like this, right? But I didn't want to risk a fight over something as little as the volume of the TV, so I let it slide this time. I did my meeting, even though I could clearly hear her shows in the background whenever I talked. Things only escalated from there. Day after day, she ate on our couch and ate our food while my husband and I worked hard. That clean room she had when she first moved in was all an act, and soon it wasn't just her room that was filthy. Empty food containers, clothes, books, and all sorts of junk was soon littered around the halls and living room of our house. By 3 weeks, I decided to confront her once again about it. Hey, Vivian, I know you're having fun here with us, but when are you going to clean some of this mess up? There's garbage everywhere, and Sergio's pretty busy with his work. While you look for a job, do you think you could chip in and clean up some of your mess?
I see how this is. You invite me here and then take advantage of a poor old woman. You know, I could hurt my back bending over to pick all this up.
But most of this is your mess to begin with. Surely you can help a little bit, right?
But I'm sure Sergio wants a clean house, right? That's the wife's responsibility. I should let him know what a bad wife you're being, trying to shirk your duties onto his poor mother like this.
What? But I just want you to clean up after yourself.
Well, I don't have to as long as my son's wife is around. You should be the one keeping the house cleaned and in order.
Vivian was manipulating me. I knew it right away, but what was I supposed to do? Sergio loved his mom more than anything in the world, so he would believe anything she told him. I had to stay on her good side. But it was just until she found another job and got a new place, I reminded myself. So I did the chores. I even cleaned up after her and kept the house as clean as I could. Now that she knew I would clean the mess, Vivian would make a bigger mess on purpose, like throwing shells on the floor and wiping her messy hands on our sofa. I held my tongue, but I was fuming mad and absolutely exhausted. But one day it went too far when Vivian looked me in the eye and deliberately spilled her wine all over our carpet.
Whoops! Clumsy me!
That's it. I'm not cleaning this up anymore. You're ruining our house, and I want you gone.
What would Sergio think of you kicking his poor old mother out of his house?
I don't care. I can't take this anymore. You need to leave immediately. It was just then that Sergio came back from his shift and saw the mess on the ground and the two of us fighting. As soon as she saw him, Vivian rushed to his side.
Oh, Sergio, she's making me clean up that nasty wine she spilled. She's been doing this for weeks whenever you were gone. I've had to clean so much and my knees and back hurt.
What's this? Audrey, what's going on here?
She's lying. I never did that, and I can prove it too. I grabbed my laptop and showed it to Sergio. I had started to record our days when I realized I needed proof for him. It showed clearly that Vivian just lounged on the couch while I cleaned. I even managed to catch her dumping her leftovers onto the ground once and making me clean it. After seeing the video, Sergio was mad. Not just because of what Vivian was doing, but that she had tried to lie about it as well. He demanded that she left immediately, and that's when we found out the truth. She hadn't even been looking for a job. She'd just been relaxing at our home for almost 2 months, and she hadn't even tried to find work. Sergio got even more mad and demanded she left. So Vivian left, taking her nasty eating habits and garbage with her, and our house returned to normal again. It was clean, but this time as an apology, Sergio cleaned the whole house from top to bottom for me. Vivian had to get a hotel, and this time she actually had to find a job instead of freeloading. She got kicked out of the hotel too for creating such a mess for them, and even got her name banned from most large hotel chains in the entire country. It's a little impressive how dirty she was, honestly, but I'm glad to be rid of her. Good riddance. Thanks for watching! Like the video for the algorithm? I would soon find out why this was happening when I returned home from a video shoot early one day. I walked in and heard some commotion coming from our laundry room. It sounded like my youngest son crying. I ran over and almost fainted at what I saw. My in-laws were standing in front of my washing machine, laughing, while my youngest son was trapped inside while the machine was running. He was getting tossed and turned, and they were just standing there laughing, using him as their own personal enjoyment. Let's just say my life was never really that easy. It was never straightforward and simple like the lives of all my classmates seemed to be. My parents died shortly after I was born in a tragic plane crash. The craziest part about that is that they never actually recovered the plane or any of the passengers, so I never received closure on my parents' death, which left me and the rest of my family with severe anxiety. After they died, I went and stayed with my crazy Uncle Bob and nitpicky Aunt Aurora. They never had kids of their own, so they accepted me as their own child and raised me as such. Despite being very poor and having weird hobbies, they raised me great and loved me as much as any parent should love their child. The kids in school often made fun of my dysfunctional family, especially when they would see Aunt Aurora pick me up wearing a full clown getup, since she was a clown part-time to make some extra cash.
You know we love you more than anything, right, Sue?
I know, Auntie. I don't care what these kids say. You and Uncle Bob have shown me what it feels like to be truly loved, which is more than a lot of those kids can say. In high school, I met a handsome boy named Teddy, and we quickly fell in love. He was my first love, and you know how strong those feelings can be. After graduation, Teddy was planning on going to college to become a weatherman, but he had to halt his plans when we discovered that I had got pregnant at only 19 years old. Although this child was unplanned, I knew immediately that I had to keep it because I was against abortion and couldn't bring myself to harm my future child. Teddy was completely fine with this, since he had no worries about his financial situation. Teddy grew up pretty well off, as his father was the owner of a gravel company that did business worldwide. Teddy promised me that he would take care of our child no matter what, and he stuck to his promise. Fast forward a couple years, and our lives had come together pretty well. We now had 3 children, and we got married shortly after our first little girl was born. Teddy got a job at his father's company, and I work from home as a freelance videographer. There was just one little hiccup in our fairy tale lifestyle, and it was that I absolutely hated my in-laws. This is a common trope, I know, but they are truly the worst. They are completely greedy. And Teddy has told me awful stories about their parenting styles that they used on him as they were raising him. When Teddy heard how amazing my aunt and uncle had been to me, he was shocked and finally realized that his parents had been borderline abusive to him. This realization came shortly before Teddy's parents' lives started to crumble. Apparently, the market for gravel had completely crashed, and it took Teddy's father's business down with it. Teddy's dad was forced to sell his company for scraps, and Teddy had to get a new job as a teacher while he looked for better work. This huge pay cut was already hard on our family, and it was hard for his parents as well. His parents even had to sell their mansion and live in a hotel while they scrambled for cash. Teddy sat me down shortly after this all went down and told me we needed to talk.
Listen, my parents might need to move in for a while. They're really struggling and they need my help.
I mean, is there any other way? I don't like those stories you told me about how abusive they were to you.
They've done so much for me, so much for us. It's time I pay them back. You need to be okay with this. They're my parents.
I swallowed my pride and agreed to let these awful people stay with us. That night, I held my kids close because I had an awful feeling about my in-laws living with us. The next day, they moved in, and immediately they were less than ideal guests. They expected to be waited on for every little thing and offered little help in return. All they would do is watch our kids while we were working. Also, as soon as they moved in, I felt a complete shift in my children's behavior. Usually my little angels were happy and cheerful, and now all of the sudden they were acting out and moping around. I would soon find out why this was happening when I returned home from a video shoot early one day. I walked in and heard some commotion coming from our laundry room. It sounded like my youngest son crying. I ran over and almost fainted at what I saw. My in-laws were standing in front of my washing machine, laughing, while my youngest son was trapped inside while the machine was running. He was getting tossed and turned, and they were just standing there laughing, using him as their own personal enjoyment. I screamed, and they seemed caught off guard. They tried to explain that it was just a horrible accident, but I knew the truth. It sounded just like some of the cruel things they had done to my husband as a kid, and they weren't going to get away with it with my kids. I ordered them to go and sit in the guest room while I helped my son recover, and they obliged. My kids explained everything that happened. They told me that as soon as they moved in, they began abusing them mentally and physically. They would call them horrible names and make them go without food during the day. They would beat them and submit them to tortuous punishment for no good reason. With my kids' confessions and my first-hand witness, I knew they would go away for a long time. When the police arrived, I told them the culprits were in the guest room, but upon checking, we discovered that they were nowhere to be seen. They had escaped and were now on the run. The policeman, who was already skeptical, was now completely disregarding my claims and telling me I was making it all up for attention. He told me to stop wasting his time, and he called me a crazy idiot. He told me I was better off dying because the world didn't need any more crazy people like me, and then he left. Just like that, I was back to square one, but I had another route to take. Remember my crazy Uncle Bob? Well, they called him crazy for a reason. He had some serious connections to the mafia, and the mafia doesn't take kindly to child abuse. After telling my uncle what my in-laws had done to his grandchildren, he immediately contacted his associates, and a manhunt was launched. It took his friends less than 2 days to track down my in-laws, and they brought them to my house, restrained in handcuffs. Me and my husband sat there in front of them, and I set up my camera and pointed it directly at them. I explained to them very carefully what was going to happen next. I told them that they were going to give a video confession to all of their wrongdoings, along with a written confession as well. After that, they would write us a check for everything they had left, leaving them completely broke. I explained to them that if they failed to accept these conditions, then my crazy Uncle Bob and his associates would carry out the exact torture they used on my children, except much, much worse. Both of my in-laws began crying and shaking with fear.
Okay, we'll do whatever you say, just please don't hurt us anymore.
Yeah, like he said, we'll do it. We're so sorry, we had no idea you were so connected.
After I recorded their confessions and had them write their wrongdoings, we drove them to the police station where we demanded they turn themselves in. I gave the police the video confession, and the written one too. They were appalled at what these two evil people had done, and told me they had no choice but to charge them immediately, and that only an incompetent officer would fail to do so. That's when I remembered that awful cop who completely ignored my begging for help. I told them about the cop who wronged me, and I gave them his name. They brought him out from the back and asked me if this was the guy. Yep, that's him. Believe me now?
Yes, I do. I'm sorry, I should have believed you. Can you please forgive me and tell them we're all good so they don't fire me?
Maybe you should have thought about that before you failed to do your job. I told the other officers that if he didn't get fired, then we would take them to civil court and sue the entire town for negligence. The chief of police fired him on the spot and kicked him to the street. Apparently, he was one payment away from losing his house and now had to go on unemployment. As for my in-laws, well, they would go on to receive the maximum penalty for their cruel actions, which was 15 years each in a maximum security prison. We cashed the check they wrote us immediately as well, which was a measly $75,000, but it was all they had left, which ensured that when they were finally released from prison, they would have nothing, and probably have to live on the streets. We saved the money for our kids' college fund, since we were going to give them the best life we possibly could. I heard the other day that both of my in-laws were being savagely beaten in prison because of how greedy they were, since they refused to share with the other inmates. Honestly, I think they deserve it, along with the rest of the horrors that happened to them. What do you think? Was I too harsh?
I will do nothing of the sort. Neither of these vermin deserve my money. They don't deserve anything other than a swift kick in the butt.
As soon as Cheryl said it, she tried to kick me, but Sarah intervened, and Cheryl ended up kicking her hard in the leg. Sarah was already very unsteady on her feet because of how large her belly had gotten and collapsed to the ground.
So, my name is Nathan, and I've always seen myself as a simple man. I don't expect much from anyone, and I have always found a way to provide for my wife. I work as a machine operator, and my wife is currently pregnant and unable to work due to it. With her being pregnant and in a high-risk pregnancy, I have had to pick up additional duties around the home, and that has been all right by me. However, little did I know that was all about to change when my mother-in-law decided to show up unannounced.
Nathan! You know that Sarah's baby shower is this Friday night. I do hope you have everything figured out. You wouldn't want to disappoint your poor, sweet wife, would you?
Honestly, I'm doing the best I can here, Cheryl. I really don't know what you expect from me. I have already enlisted my sister to help me because she understands this kind of thing better than I do. Besides, I've already had to take the night off of work for this thing.
Well, I expect you to have it all figured out by that morning. I need you to help me move the furniture around so we have enough room for everything. Also, I hope your sister knows how to help you make party games. I want there to be at least 6 games, all unique, and I want the food to be hot and fresh for when my friends get there.
I couldn't do anything but let out a silent sigh. As much as I love my wife, I don't know why I even try with my mother-in-law. That woman will never be pleased, and I certainly am not the kind of man she wanted to see her daughter with. Cheryl always saw herself having a businessman or a doctor as a son-in-law, not a dirty factory worker.
Are you all right, brother? I know she gets under your skin, but don't worry. I am here to help. There is nothing we can't do when we put our minds to it.
Thanks, sis. I wish I had something better to say to her. She will never fully understand how she is my rock. My sister has been there for me through everything, including our parents' divorce. I know that I can always count on her for support. We spend the next few days preparing for the party and split the work between us. By the time that Friday rolled around, Mindy and I were completely exhausted. I begrudgingly dragged myself to Cheryl's house bright and early Friday morning, right after getting off of work.
Now, Nathan, I want the couch moved against that wall there and the living room empty and cleared. I've got to go out and get some things. I'm sure your sister won't mind helping you with getting this place ready in time. Remember, my girlfriends will get here around 6 tonight. Sarah will be with me today, and I don't want you bothering her either. You know she's in a very delicate condition.
I understand, Cheryl. We will do our best to get everything set up exactly how you want it. I know that Sarah deserves to have a wonderful night celebrating the upcoming arrival of our son.
Don't worry, Miss H. Nathan and I have this. You don't have to worry about anything.
I'm so sorry, sis. I should have never asked for your help. This is way too much. I don't know why she expects so much. She does this every time something comes up too. We all have to put our lives on hold for her, and she disappears.
Nathan, you're my brother. Why on earth wouldn't I help you? The only thing I don't understand is how she has so much clutter for a single woman.
I think she hoards things because her husband ran off with his assistant.
Well, that would explain a lot. Even Mom didn't start doing that. Then again, she does have like 20 cats.
Mindy and I spent the entire day clearing furniture, cleaning up clutter, and trying to get the food timed out correctly. It was clear that we would never get everything done and up to Cheryl's expectations, but we did our best. The hours were long and grueling, but we powered through it, side by side. Finally, the hour of the party was at hand, and as per tradition, I get kicked out. After all, we all know that men aren't allowed at baby showers. Mindy had decided that she was going to set up her phone to record the entire thing for me. I don't know what I would do without her. About an hour into the party, I get a phone call, and you would never guess who it was.
Nathan, the place looks okay, but we really don't have the room to play all of the games, especially with the gifts in the way. I need you to come over here and figure something out.
I didn't even get the chance to say anything because she hung up before I could even open my mouth. I tried to shrug it off and got into my car. It's a short drive, and I made good time getting there. I rung the doorbell, and seconds later, Cheryl answered the door and looked quite annoyed at me.
What do you think you're doing? You know you can't be here during the baby shower. Now, if you really want to help, you will get with your sister and go through the back door. Didn't your mother raise you better than this?
Hang on, Miss H. No one talks to my brother like that. My brother and I have been working really hard for you because you wanted this party to be the best it can be. No wonder he always has issues with you. You treat him like a doormat.
It's all right, sis. I'm going to find out what needs done, and then I'm going back home.
No, brother, you don't have to take that. I don't know who this woman thinks she is, but not only is she treating you like garbage, but she's also disrespecting Mother. I won't just stand by and watch.
Really, it's all right. At this point, the fun and games had come to a halt, and Sarah was clearly not having fun anymore as she stepped into the doorway. Cheryl picked up on this quickly and had plenty to say about it.
Now do you two see what you have done? This is supposed to be Sarah's night. Nathan, you had one job to do and you couldn't even do that right. As for you, Mindy, I think it's about time for you to leave. You have proven that you are just as ungrateful as your brother.
As this was all going on, I noticed that Mindy's phone was sitting on the fireplace mantle, and the screen was showing everything that was going on. I couldn't help but smile to myself as the reality hits me. Mindy had been recording the baby shower, but instead, she'd been live streaming the entire thing. I could see little chat heads popping up left and right. Mindy, how long have you been live streaming?
Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that. It would be easier just to do it like that. Don't worry, I've also got it recording. I've had it going all day. Maybe we should look at what my viewers have commented about it.
What is going on here exactly, and why are you trying to treat my mom like a bad guy? She and I have been out shopping and getting things for the baby all day. The least you could do is be thankful that she even wanted to include you.
That's right, you lowlife. I didn't have to let you be a part of this at all. I even allowed your sister to stay.
Apparently, neither Cheryl or Sarah were aware of the phone capturing every bit of this, or they just didn't care. I decided to just keep my mouth shut and watch how it all played out.
Let's see here. I like this comment. That mother-in-law really needs to realize that the world doesn't revolve around her. Here's another one. Why does the wife stand up for her mother over her husband? Aren't they supposed to be fostering a healthy environment for the baby?
Why do I care what some idiot on the internet thinks? They probably aren't even real anyway.
I don't understand why they're talking about me. They have no idea what I'm going through here. Why not just mind their own business?
My brother and I have been working for days on this party because your mother said it had to be perfect. The second something wasn't going according to plan, your mother calls my brother to fix it.
Well, that's what I hired him for.
I thought you were doing a favor by letting me be a part of it. I don't recall you hiring me for anything. The second I get back over here, you decide that I deserve to be treated like a dog again. You know what? I have had more than enough of this. Don't ask me to do anything else for you.
Sarah, are you going to let him talk to me like this? This is ridiculous. I have done so much for the both of you.
Mother, Nathan is right. You don't treat him well, and I have just put up with you doing it. That was wrong of me. Nathan, I am sorry. Things are going to be different from now on. For starters, I think that you should apologize to Nathan and pay him and his sister for all the work that they did for this party.
I will do nothing of the sort. Neither of these vermin deserve my money. They don't deserve anything other than a swift kick in the butt.
As soon as Cheryl said it, she tried to kick me, but Sarah intervened, and Cheryl ended up kicking her hard in the leg. Sarah was already very unsteady on her feet because of how large her belly had gotten and collapsed to the ground. In a panic, I scooped her up and ran to my car and drove instantly to the hospital. Mindy came along, and the three of us were happy to find out that although the kick left a very large bruise, that no permanent damage had been done, and that the baby was just fine. While we were all relieved, Sarah was enraged that her mother had tried to kick me and had instead hurt her. She called her mother and told her that until her mother apologized for everything and paid both myself and Mindy, that she would never see the baby once he was born. And furthermore, that she had better change her attitude towards me, or else we would cut her out of our lives faster than lightning. This terrified Cheryl, and she showed up within an hour and handed a large amount of money to both Mindy and myself, and then promised that she would try to be better in the future. I knew that she was only saying it because she was afraid of being denied seeing her one and only grandson, but I would take what I could get. After that, things began to change around the house as well. Sarah realized that she had been treating me similar to the way that her mother had been, and even though she was still pregnant, she made an effort to help me around the house, and once our son was born, we made lists of what chores needed to be done and divided it evenly so that neither was overburdened. Things really did start to improve, and although Cheryl still obviously dislikes me, she keeps her mouth shut about it at least, and I in turn keep the peace. and when I opened the lid and looked inside, my heart nearly stopped. There was a gun inside of it. As far back as I could remember, my parents had never owned a firearm. Hi there, my name is Jake, and I'm 29 years old, and I wanted to tell you about something that has been troubling me lately. Although in truth, it's actually a very old problem that has persisted since childhood. My parents never really saw eye to eye. In fact, I often wondered why my mother and father had actually even gotten married since, as far back as I can remember, they pretty much hated one another. However, all that came to an end when my father was murdered. The police suspected that it had been a burglary that had gone wrong, but they could never find the gun that was used to kill him, nor could they ever find any evidence that would find a suspect. My mother reveled in her newfound freedom, and I suspected that she would kiss my father's murderer rather than bring them to justice. It didn't hurt that my father left behind a rather large life insurance policy that instantly made our family rather wealthy. We sold the small house we used to live in, and my mother bought a large mansion. Even as young as I was, I would worry how it was that we were going to pay for everything, but my mother didn't share my concerns. She was too busy enjoying the life of luxury. My brother Tom seemed to be in the same boat as our mother, but he had always taken her side with everything. Whenever our parents would fight, he would always find a way to think that our father had been in the wrong. It didn't matter what they would argue about, he would have her back. It didn't hurt that he bore a strong resemblance to our mother, while I was the very image of our father. This fact alone made my mother despise me, and she always favored Tom. It wasn't that she never paid attention to me, but it was always obvious that he was her favorite. If I would have a birthday party, he would be given one even bigger and more expensive. My mother bought Tom a brand new mountain bike, while she got me one from a secondhand store. When we came of age and got our driver's licenses, my mother bought Tom a brand new sports car, while I had struggled to afford a beat-up junker. It was honestly very annoying, but I didn't feel like it was my place to complain. I had always just felt that I had to endure it until I could move out and just focus on my own life. And when I turned 18, I did just that. I knew that my mother wasn't going to pay for my schooling, but luckily, I was able to find a scholarship that would pay for a large amount of my tuition. When my mother found out that I was going to school, she was very upset though.
Why are you going to school? I need you to get a job and help support the family.
But Mom, if I go to school to become a dentist, then I'll make good money. Besides, don't you still have a lot of money left over from the life insurance policy from Dad?
Don't you talk back to me. And yes, I do. But the money from your father isn't endless, and we have bills to pay. Even Tom has gotten a job and is helping out. Why must you be like your dad and be so difficult?
It was so aggravating, but I really didn't have much of a choice. In the end, I got myself a part-time job bartending while I attended school. I would send almost half my paycheck to my mother every week, while I kept the rest to pay for my own bills. After the 8 years of school were done, I was able to open my own practice and ended up quitting my job as a bartender. I knew that I would make more money, but I didn't realize just how much more it would end up being. However, I never changed the amount that I would send to my mother. Even though nothing changed, my mother still called me up to complain that she wasn't receiving more money than she had in the past.
Jake, why aren't you giving me more? You and I both know that a dentist makes far more money than a bartender. Why haven't the checks you are sending me increased?
I'm sorry, Mom, but I have to pay my staff, plus get insurance and pay rent on my business. I can't send more than what I am. It's always been enough in the past. Shouldn't it still be enough now?
Well, it normally would be yes, but your brother hurt himself at work and has had to take some time off while he heals. As such, money is a bit tight at the moment.
I didn't believe her, of course, but I also didn't really care. In the end, I promised that I would try to send a bit more money from now on, and because I felt guilty, I did. However, it wasn't enough. And after a few months of the increased payments, my mother called me again to complain, but also to ask for even more.
Jake, I could really use a large sum of money. I know that you have bills to pay, but your father's life insurance money didn't go as far as I would have liked, and we are in rough shape. Please, I don't want to lose the house. Can you please send me $10,000? I know it's a lot, but I don't want to live on the street, please.
Again, something about her request didn't sit well with me, but in the end, I just felt that I had no choice. The idea of my own mother being homeless pulled at my heartstrings, and in the end, I gathered up the money and sent it to her. Just as before, though, a few months passed, and then she called again to ask for another $10,000.
Please, Jake. With your brother still not able to work and my own job not paying that well, we could really use the help.
But what did you do with the other $10,000 I sent you? Also, if you can't afford to live in that mansion, couldn't you sell it and buy a place that you can afford easier?
What are you saying? This is our home, and I spent the other money on bills and food for your brother and I. How can you be so heartless? You're just as greedy as your father was.
I was so angry how she kept speaking so ill of myself and my deceased father, and even though I sent her the check, I made a point of going over to her house to see what exactly was going on. When I arrived, no one was home, and I let myself in as I still had a key. Making my way to my mother's office, I began to go through her desk to see if there was any paperwork that would show what she was spending my hard-earned money on. There were a few bills on her desk, but none of them were very expensive. But in the bottom drawer of her desk, I found a bank statement. It showed the amount of money in her personal account, and while she had inherited over $250,000 when my father died, she had invested the money very well. So much so that there was still well over $400,000 in the account. Angry and confused, I didn't understand why she needed my money so much when it was clear that she was doing quite well on her own. Frustrated, I slammed the drawer shut with such force that the whole desk shook violently, and when it stopped, I heard a strange metal noise. It sounded like something metallic dropped under her desk, and when I bent over to look, I saw that a key had been taped to the underside of a drawer and had fallen when the desk shook. Picking it up, I looked at it carefully, and then instantly knew what it was for. My mother had a safe behind a painting in her office, and when I went over to it and used the key, I found that it opened it. Inside were even more documents showing that my mother had more than just that one bank account, and in fact, she was doing quite well for herself. However, all that just confirmed what I had already discovered. As I kept looking, though, I found a small shoebox in the safe that looked quite out of place, and when I opened the lid and looked inside, my heart nearly stopped. There was a gun inside of it. As far back as I could remember, my parents had never owned a firearm, and I feared why my mother owned this one. Careful not to touch the gun, I closed the shoebox and slid it into a backpack that I had brought with me, and then made my way outside. As I did, my brother Tom pulled into the driveway driving a luxury car. The car was brand new, and I could only guess how he was able to afford it without having a job. So, is this what the money I've been sending you to going towards? I thought you had bills to pay? You should mind your own business. This is my business. You and Mom are spending the money I send you on frivolous things while crying that you can't make ends meet? Are you even hurt and unable to work, Tom?
You have no right to speak to us like this. Your father was just as paranoid, and look what it got him.
I had to bite my tongue because I had my suspicions about what she meant by that. Although I just stormed off while the two of them just laughed at me. As soon as I got home, I changed all my banking information so that the regular payments that I made to them would stop, but I then needed to decide what I would do with the gun that I found. I knew that it was a long shot, but there was something that I found disturbing about it. Almost as if the ghost of my father was telling me that it was important. And so I brought it to the police and asked them to investigate if it was the murder weapon that had been the missing piece of the puzzle. After so many years, they were blown away that I had been the one to find it, but they confirmed that it was indeed the murder weapon, and there were only one set of fingerprints on it. The next day, the police brought my mother in for questioning and even fingerprinted her at the same time. Sure enough, her fingerprints were a match to those on the gun, and once they confronted her with this evidence, she broke down in tears and confessed that she had been the one to shoot and kill my father, and then stage the house to make it look like a robbery. She confessed that she had done it because of his life insurance policy. Over the years, they had fought about money so often that she saw it as a way to become wealthy, and she didn't care that it would cost him his life. Everyone that we knew was blown away at this earth-shattering news, but personally, I was just relieved that my father could finally rest easily now that his killer would face justice. With her having confessed and the murder weapon having been found, my mother was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and her assets and accounts were all seized by the police. As the police began going over her accounts, they discovered that murder was the least of her crimes. They found evidence that my mother and brother were even involved in money laundering and had been doing so for local crime families. Once the police discovered this, they then arrested my brother Tom as well. In the end, he was also sentenced to 10 years in prison, and my mother was given an additional 10 years in prison for the new charges. I had opened up a can of worms, and I couldn't have been happier. To think that if my mother hadn't been so greedy and kept harassing me for money, then her crimes would have gone unpunished. I do feel guilty that not only have I lost my father, but I have now lost my brother and mother too. But I do realize that I did the right thing. What do you think, though? Would you have done the same?
Their house was very dilapidated and looked like it was seconds away from falling apart. Once Tobias parked the car, he then pulled my luggage out of the trunk and threw it to the ground and began to violently search through it until he found my passport. Once he did, he scooped it up and put it in pocket. "Hey, that's mine. What are you doing?"
Quiet, silly girl. You belong to us now, and without this, you won't be able to run away. Patricia gave you up for adoption when you were a baby without my knowing, but now we have you back, and you are our property.
I tried to reach out and grab the passport from him, and he easily shoved me away and then slapped me so hard that I... Hello there. My name is Jessica, and the past 2 years have been quite the roller coaster. I doubt what happened to me would happen to most people. But I want to tell you my story so that just in case hearing my story might help someone else. So let me start off by saying that I had pretty much always known that I was adopted. My parents had always felt that I should know this fact, but also that they loved me more than anything else in the world, and that they felt that adopting me was the best decision that they had ever made. They had adopted me when I was very young, and so they had been the only parents that I had ever known. And honestly, I had a very happy childhood. That is, until I turned 14. There was a terrible accident. My parents were on a yacht that belonged to a friend of theirs, and during a sudden and unexpected storm, the ship sank and they drowned. The whole experience scarred me and gave me an irrational fear of the water. After the funeral, my mother's sister Cecilia took me in and did her best to fill the void that had been left when my parents passed away. Thankfully, she was just as lovely as my mother had been, and I truly did love and appreciate everything that she was doing for me at the time, but the whole experience had opened up something in me. It made me realize that life was short and I wanted to know more about where I had come from. And so I began to do some investigative research to who my birth parents were.
Are you sure you want to know who they are? You might not like what you find out.
That is a possibility, but yeah. I would rather know that they are awful people than never know a thing about them. I don't know why, but it's just something that I have to do.
Well, I'm here to support you no matter what happens. Just don't forget that no matter what you find out, that you always have a home here with me. I love you, Jessica, and I only want the best for you.
My aunt was absolutely amazing. And more than once, I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, or if I should just give up and accept that my birth parents had given me up, and that my life was just separate from theirs. However, something made me keep looking. As a teenager, I didn't have a lot of resources as I didn't have money to hire a private investigator or anything, but I was pretty handy when it came to finding things on the internet, and I used a message board, and against all odds, I managed to find my birth parents. As it turned out, they were looking for me as well, and had posted some information about my adoption on the message board. Of course, I was careful, as I suspected that it might be a scam, and so I told my aunt, and we then privately messaged them to make sure that they were who they claimed to be, and they knew everything about my adoption, including where I was adopted from, who adopted me, and all of my medical history as well. Once I knew who they were, I began chatting with them every day, and we started to develop a bond. Things were going so well, in fact, that they invited me to come visit them during my summer break from school. They lived in another country, and the thought of going on a trip for the summer to a faraway land sounded exciting. The only real snag was that my aunt would be unable to come with me, as her job wouldn't allow her to take her vacation during the summer, as it was her busy season, but she did agree to let me go. Once the school year ended, I packed my bags and got on a plane bound for Greece. I knew that I should have slept on the flight there, but I was so excited that I just couldn't fall asleep. When I landed, I was greeted by my birth parents and found out their names were Tobias and Patricia. It felt awkward at first to finally meet them face to face, but that didn't last long. My mother threw her arms around me and kissed me dozens of times. We then got into their car and drove through the countryside until we arrived at their home, which was pretty remote. They even had a makeshift drawbridge that crossed a river that surrounded their property. I could tell that they really valued their privacy. Once we pulled up in front of their house, though, I had a sinking feeling come over me, and I began to get worried. Their house was very dilapidated and looked like it was seconds away from falling apart. Once Tobias parked the car, he then pulled my luggage out of the trunk and threw it to the ground and began to violently search through it until he found my passport. Once he did, he scooped it up and put it in pocket. "Hey, that's mine. What are you doing?"
Quiet, silly girl. You belong to us now, and without this, you won't be able to run away. Patricia gave you up for adoption when you were a baby without my knowing, but now we have you back, and you are our property.
I tried to reach out and grab the passport from him, and he easily shoved me away and then slapped me so hard that I fell to the ground. Looking up at Patricia, I hoped that she would defend me, but she looked down at me on the ground and smiled.
Don't try anything foolish. The river that surrounds our home is very fast and you will drown if you try to cross it. And should you talk back or disobey us, being slapped is the least of your worries.
I had no idea what was going on, but I quickly learned that I needed to be careful what I said around them. After they stole my passport, they dragged me inside and showed me to a small room that had a straw mattress and a thin burlap sheet for a blanket but no pillow. Aside from that, the room was empty. That night I tried to sleep, but it was so cold and the straw offered no comfort at all. As soon as the sun came up, they put me to work. In the morning, they had me cleaning the entire house and preparing meals for the day. And in the afternoon, they had me doing yard work, clearing out the weeds from the garden and even chopping firewood. When the sun finally set, I was beyond exhausted, and Tobias locked me in my new bedroom. I had been planning on searching the home for a phone or a computer once Tobias and Patricia went to bed, but with the door locked, I was unable to do a search. The next day was the same, and the day after that, and the day after that. I was convinced that I was going to be living this nightmare for the rest of my life. Since I had no other options, I decided to try to have a talk with Patricia and appeal to her maternal instincts. I waited until I was alone with her and was sure that Tobias wouldn't overhear us. "Hey, Patricia, why are you and Tobias doing this to me?"
You are our child, and as such, you need to do as we say. You were gone for 15 years and have a lot of work to make up for.
"But how am I supposed to do that? Plus, you were the one to give me up. I never chose for you to put me up for adoption."
It was a mistake, but we will make you work hard until it is time for you to be married.
Married? I have no plans of getting married.
No, but we do. We have arranged to sell you to a wealthy family to marry their son. He is coming over in a few days to see you. After that, the two of you will be married and we will be wealthy. We will use the money to renovate or buy a new house, and then some savings for some stuffs I can't tell you. For now, keep working, or else you will be forced to see your future husband while having a black eye and a split lip.
I knew that her threat was all too real, and the idea that all this was just a ruse to get me in their hands just so they could sell me off was revolting, although it did give me a plan. There was no way of knowing if it would work, and it would mean that I would have to face a fear that had plagued me since my parents passed away when I was a child. I wish I could say that the days passed by quickly, but they were grueling and hard. But the morning came when I was to meet my future husband, and as I braced myself for another hard day's worth of work. Patricia unlocked and opened the door to my room. In her hands, she had a pretty purple dress.
Put this dress on. Malcolm will be here soon to make sure that you are worth marrying, and you better put on a good act. If he doesn't marry you, we shall make sure that you regret ever being born.
All I could do was nod my head and agree and hope that my plan would work. Once I was dressed, I was led outside and introduced to Malcolm, who turned out to be a middle-aged, heavy-set man. The way that he leered at me made me feel very uncomfortable. It was obvious that he rather liked how I looked, and, considering our age differences, it sent a shiver up my spine.
Okay, you two lovebirds go for a walk and talk and get to know each other. We keep an eye on you from a distance, though.
Malcolm walked over and offered me his arm so that he could lead me around. Against my better judgment, I accepted his offer and wrapped my arm around his and let him lead me away from the house. As we walked, he kept shifting his arm around to touch me. At first, he just rubbed my arm, but slowly he began rubbing my back and moving his arm slowly downwards. Before he could truly harass me, I made my move. Malcolm, do you think we could walk closer to the river? I find being near the water very romantic.
Of course, my dear. I would spend time with such a lovely creature as you anywhere.
He steered me towards the river, and as soon as we were close to the riverbank, he pulled me in close and tried to kiss me. He was so incredibly strong, but there was no way that I was going to let those monsters marry me off to this disgusting man. As he leaned in, I thrust my knee as hard as I could into his crotch, but rather than make my break at that moment, I kneed him a second time just to be sure. As he toppled to the ground, writhing in pain, I punched him in the face just for good measure before turning towards the river and running at full force. The thought of trying to swim across the water terrified me, but only half as much as staying and getting married to Malcolm. As I ran out into the water, I was surprised to find that it was only a foot deep, and as I waded across, it never got any deeper. Either it was an unseasonably dry time of year, or Tobias and Patricia had been bluffing about the river. At any rate, I made it across and then ran down the road as quickly as I could. I had seen a house down the road when they had first brought me here, and I ran towards it as fast as I could go and was relieved when I made it there before they managed to catch up to me. Once inside, I spoke to the family, who thankfully spoke English, and told them what had happened to me. The mother of the family quickly phoned the police, who showed up within 10 minutes. There were several police cars, and while one stayed with me to take my statement, the others raced down the road towards Patricia and Tobias's home. I later found out that the police had only arrived just in time to prevent Tobias, Patricia, and Malcolm from fleeing. All three were arrested on the spot. When they went to court, though, Malcolm received the lightest sentence since he hadn't actually done anything, but he had still attempted to marry a minor, and he was sentenced to a year in prison and over 1,000 hours of community service. As for Patricia and Tobias, they were sentenced to prison for life. Among their charges were kidnapping, abuse of a minor, trafficking of a minor, and attempting to resist arrest. Apparently, both of them wouldn't let the police handcuff them, and they fought back and were only subdued when the police used their stun guns on them. After that, I was finally able to return home to be with my aunt, who blamed herself for letting me go, although it wasn't even remotely her fault. After all, how were we supposed to know what kind of monsters those terrible people were? And there you have it. That's my story, and I hope by telling it that I might just help someone out. Be careful out there. Sometimes the least likely people are the worst monsters.
That's the problem, Mrs. Langston. Lindsay confided in me that when she and her stepfather are alone together, he touches her inappropriately, and he tells her to keep it a secret so neither one of them will get into trouble.
My name is Kate, and I'm 35 years old. I'm a mother to an 8-year-old daughter, Lindsay. I had her during my marriage to my ex-husband, which only lasted a few years. Frederick had started out as a loving guy, and I was sure he was my soulmate. We met just after I graduated from college when I bumped into him in a coffee shop. I didn't see him as I turned to leave, and we collided, making me spill my coffee all over him. Frederick was understanding about what happened and even bought another coffee for me. After that, we ended up staying in the coffee shop, talking for hours. He was fascinating. At the time, he'd just gotten a job as a veterinary assistant, and he would tell me about all the animals that he'd help examine and treat. I loved to hear about his work, and I especially loved the way he would light up when talking to me about it. He had a passion for helping animals, and I couldn't help admiring that part of him. After a few years of dating, Frederick proposed to me, and I said yes. We were married later that year, and 12 months after that, I became pregnant with Lindsay. At the time, I couldn't have been any happier. Frederick and I had been talking about starting a family of our own for a few months at that point, and when I found out that we were having a baby, I knew I was ready to become a mother. I broke the news to Frederick that night, and he took the news well. Honey?
Yes, dear.
I have some very exciting news for you.
Well, what is it? Don't keep me in suspense.
I'm pregnant. We're going to be parents.
You're pregnant?
Yes.
That's wonderful. This is exactly what we've been preparing for.
That night, he kissed me and held me tight, and we stayed up half the night going over baby names we liked. Throughout my pregnancy, Frederick was there at my side, making sure I was healthy and that all of my needs were met. He attended every doctor's appointment with me, and every day we both got more and more excited. I was healthy for all 9 months, and one day my water finally broke. I was ecstatic. Except my excitement disappeared when I couldn't get a hold of Frederick. He'd gone into work that morning and told me to call if anything happened. He promised me he would pick up the phone as long as he wasn't treating a patient. But when I called, the secretary said that he had never arrived at the building. I was worried about him, but I had to think about getting to the hospital since I was going into labor, so I called one of my friends to drive me. Hours later, after our sweet baby girl was born, there was still no sign of Frederick. I was beginning to worry about him. Since giving birth, my friend had gone outside and tried to call him multiple times, all with no success. Then a police officer walked into my hospital room, and immediately I got a sinking feeling in my stomach.
Are you Kate Langston?
Yes. What are you doing here, officer?
Ma'am, I'm very sorry to have to tell you that your husband, Frederick Langston, was killed in a car crash earlier today.
When I heard that, it felt like my whole world had shattered. It was the most difficult challenge of my life to have to continue on without my husband and the father of our child. I loved Lindsay, and it was my greatest joy to raise her, but it was also the most difficult thing I had to do by myself. At times, it felt like I was completely alone, even with my friends stopping by to help sometimes. It took a few years before it felt like I could breathe again and talk to Lindsay about her father without wanting to cry. After Lindsay turned 12, my friend Christine introduced me to my current husband, Jeremy. He was friendly and wanted kids of his own, so she thought we would make a good match, and that having another person to parent Lindsay would make things easier for me and my daughter. Jeremy and I got along well, and having him in the house did help alleviate some of the stress of parenting, not to mention how well he got along with Lindsay. On nights I had to work late, Jeremy would stay with Lindsay and make sure she was taken care of, and oftentimes would spend as much of his free time as he could bonding with her. With the comfort I felt being around him, and the way he got along with my daughter, I couldn't help accepting his marriage proposal. That was about the same time I started to notice some changes in Lindsay, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. After our wedding, I started to notice Lindsay's grades slipping, and she began to grow more and more quiet and reserved. She started to drift away from the sweet and friendly little girl that I'd raised. At the time, I thought that maybe she was being bullied in school, so I approached her teacher and asked how the other students had been treating her. Only the teacher, Ms. Parker, said that Lindsay, before she'd started shutting people out, was friendly with a lot of the students. Most of the class was able to get along with her, and the rest didn't mind Lindsay. I was at a loss. I didn't know what was going on with Lindsay and how to help, so one night I went into her room after dinner and asked her, "Lindsay, honey, is there something going on?" Lindsay wouldn't look me in the eyes and didn't answer my question. She didn't say anything at all. Whatever was happening, she wasn't comfortable telling me about it. And while that broke my heart, I decided not to push the issue. I told Jeremy about my concerns, and he immediately reassured me that I shouldn't be worried.
It's all right, sweetheart. Maybe Lindsay just has some kind of learning disability, and it's making her self-conscious. It's nothing to be scared about.
Jeremy made a good point, so the next day I started looking into getting an appointment with a specialist to see if Lindsay had some kind of learning disorder. A few days later, the doctor could see us. So after Jeremy left for work, I brought Lindsay in and waited for the doctor to talk to me. After a few hours, the doctor invited me into his office and sat me down. What he said next completely shocked me.
Mrs. Langston, after a thorough examination, I found that Lindsay does not have a learning disability.
Oh, that's wonderful. But then, what's going on with her? Why is she quiet and not doing well in school?
That's what I really need to speak to you about. The reason Lindsay isn't doing well in school and is shutting people out is because of her stepfather.
What? Jeremy? That's not true. He adores Lindsay. He spends as much time with her as he can. He helps her with all of her homework and tucks her into bed at night.
That's the problem, Mrs. Langston. Lindsay confided in me that when she and her stepfather are alone together, He touches her inappropriately, and he tells her to keep it a secret so neither one of them will get into trouble.
I couldn't believe what I'd heard. My husband had been molesting my daughter? I almost didn't want to believe it, but I did for Lindsay's sake. As awful as I felt hearing about it, she was the one suffering, and I had to put her well-being over my feelings. Is there anything I can do to help Lindsay? The doctor advised me to take Lindsay to the hospital so a couple of doctors could examine her, and to find a therapist that she could talk to. He also provided me with several resources for family members of abuse victims to help me help my daughter. He also told me it would be beneficial to keep Jeremy and Lindsay separate. I was way ahead of him there. I had absolutely no intention of allowing that bastard near my child anymore. For now, I would be able to stay at a friend's place with Lindsay. She would keep it a secret where we were so we wouldn't have to worry about him trying to find us and bring us back to the house. A few days later, I was searching for a good divorce lawyer and stumbled across the page of Jeremy's ex-girlfriend. He'd mentioned her a couple weeks into our relationship, and he made her out to be some kind of villain. Back then, he seemed trustworthy enough that I never questioned him. Of course, I knew better now. I scrolled through her page and found out that she also had a daughter. I wondered if Jeremy had abused her too, so I reached out. Her name was Jennifer, and she confirmed my suspicions. Jeremy had sexually touched her daughter in secret during their relationship. I told her that the same had happened with Lindsay, and we both knew that we needed to do something, or else he would continue to abuse my child. It was bad enough that he had hurt my own daughter, but to find out that he had done this before, and that he had gotten away with it was almost too much for me to take. It made me so incredibly angry, and so I created an anonymous account on a few social media websites and posted his pictures along with some rather strong words, indicating how he had hurt children in the past, and that if you dated him, that you should ask your own children if he hurt them as well. I knew that it wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I was just so mad, and I wanted him to pay for what he had done. Not to mention that there was a chance that our daughters weren't his first victims, and if he had hurt others, they also deserved to know that would pay for his crimes. After that, I met up with Jennifer, and together, so we both met up with our daughters and immediately went to the police. One of the female officers listened to our stories and took us seriously. She sent out officers to the house and arrested Jeremy, who insisted that he was innocent and that his arrest was some kind of mistake. Then he saw me and Jennifer with our daughters, and he realized that I knew what he had been doing. I couldn't help but smile when I saw Jeremy's face and noticed that he had a black eye and a split lip. The police later informed me that Jeremy had been receiving threats from the community, as well as having been attacked a few times by random strangers on the street. It would seem that the community now knew what kind of a monster that he was and had begun to take justice into their own hands. On top of that, the police told us that we weren't the first women to come to the station to report that Jeremy had hurt our daughters. 2 other women had come in and filed reports and even had evidence to back up their claims as well. When I asked the officers what would be done to Jeremy now that he was in custody, they winked at me and told me that people like him don't usually have comfortable nights while in jail. Chances were pretty high that a black eye and a split lip would be the least of his problems once the other inmates found out why he had been arrested. The police pressed charges against him, and his trial was quick. Because of Lindsay and Jennifer's daughter coming forward to talk about what Jeremy did to them, as well as the 2 other women, the judge gave him a life sentence and he was taken away. It was all over the news in our town, so if he ever got out, he would never be allowed to forget. I divorced him while he was in prison, and I've been doing my best to move on with my life. Lindsay still has a lot of healing to do, and so does Jennifer and her own daughter. But the process will be a lot easier now that the monster responsible will spend the rest of his life getting exactly what he deserves behind bars.